If someone doesn't choose you and you stay anyway, the problem is no longer them, it's you. Buddhism calls this attachment. And attachment is the quiet addiction that keeps you begging for love that already left. 1. Suffering begins when you chase what doesn't choose you. The Buddha taught that suffering does not begin with pain itself. It begins earlier, quieter, and far more dangerously with craving. Craving is not just wanting something. It is insisting that reality be different from what it is. When someone does not choose you, but you keep reaching, pleading, explaining, waiting, or hoping they will change, you are not responding to love. You are fighting reality. And Buddhism is ruthless about this point. Reality always wins. Most people misunderstand where their pain actually comes from. They think rejection is what hurts. It isn't. Rejection is an event. Pain is what happens when you refuse to accept that event. The suffering starts when you replay conversations in your head, when you search for signs that aren't there, when you convince yourself that if you just say the right thing or give a little more, they'll finally choose you. That is craving. And craving is the root of suffering. The truth is not complicated, just uncomfortable. If someone wanted to stay, they would. If they wanted to choose you, they wouldn't leave you confused, anxious, or constantly guessing where you stand. Buddhism does not ask you to soften this truth or wrap it in comforting lies. It asks you to look at it directly. Clear seeing is the beginning of freedom. When you chase someone who does not choose you, you are not being patient. You are not being loyal. You are not being loving. You are being attached to an outcome that no longer exists. You are clinging to a version of the person that lives only in your mind. This is why the Buddha warned against attachment so strongly. Attachment blinds you. It makes you negotiate with reality instead of accepting it. Acceptance in Buddhism is often misunderstood as weakness or giving up. It is neither. Acceptance is strength without illusion. It is the courage to stop lying to yourself. Acceptance is saying, "This is what is happening, even if I don't like it." The moment you accept what is, you stop bleeding energy into resistance. You stop asking why they don't choose you. You stop trying to earn what should be freely given, and in that moment, suffering begins to loosen its grip. Think about how much pain comes not from what someone did, but from what you hoped they would do. The messages you waited for, the commitment you expected, the effort you imagined. None of that pain comes from reality. It comes from expectation. Buddhism teaches that expectations are just future disappointments rehearsed in advance. When you expect someone to choose you despite their actions saying otherwise, you are setting yourself up for suffering on repeat. Chasing what doesn't choose you also erodes your self-respect, even if you don't notice it immediately. Each time you ignore clear signs of disinterest, you teach yourself that your needs don't matter. Each time you tolerate inconsistency, you normalize emotional hunger. Over time, this becomes your baseline. You start believing love is something you have to earn through endurance. Buddhism would call this ignorance, not stupidity, but ignorance of your own worth and of impermanence. Impermanence is another key teaching here. People change, feelings shift, situations end. When you cling to someone as if they are permanent, you suffer when they behave exactly as impermanent things always do. Buddhism does not promise that people will stay. It teaches you how not to break when they leave. The problem is not that someone didn't choose you. The problem is that you built your peace on something that was never stable to begin with. There is also an illusion of control hidden inside chasing. You may tell yourself you are just being hopeful, but underneath that hope is a belief that you can influence their choice if you try hard enough. Buddhism dismantles this illusion quickly. You do not control other people's feelings, decisions, or timing. Trying to control what is not yours to control is another form of craving. And again, craving produces suffering. When you stop chasing, something important happens. You begin to see clearly. You notice how exhausted you've been, how tense your body feels. How much of your day was spent thinking about someone who gave you very little back? This clarity can be painful at first, but it is honest pain, not self-inflicted suffering. Buddhism values this kind of pain because it leads to wisdom. Letting go at this stage does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop arguing with reality. You stop asking, "Why don't they choose me?" and start asking, "Why am I choosing what hurts me?" That question changes everything. It shifts the focus from them to you, from blame to awareness. Awareness is where freedom begins. The moment you stop chasing what doesn't choose you, you reclaim your energy. You are no longer leaking attention into uncertainty. You are no longer feeding hope where there is no evidence. And slowly, suffering weakens, not because the situation changed, but because you did. Buddhism is not interested in comforting fantasies. It is interested in liberation. And liberation starts the moment you stop chasing what has already shown you the truth. 2. Attachment is not love. One of the most dangerous misunderstandings people carry is confusing attachment with love. Buddhism draws a sharp line between the two, and most suffering in relationships comes from standing on the wrong side of that line. Love, in its pure form, is spacious. It allows. It respects freedom. Attachment, on the other hand, is tight, anxious, and afraid. It clings, it demands, it needs. And Buddhism is very clear about this. Attachment is not a virtue. It is a cause of suffering. When you say you love someone but feel panicked at the thought of them leaving, that is not love, it is fear. When your peace depends on their messages, their attention, or their reassurance, that is not love, it is dependence. Love wishes well-being without possession. Attachment says, "I need you to be a certain way so I can be okay." The Buddha warned against this because anything you depend on for emotional survival controls you. Attachment forms quietly. It often disguises itself as loyalty, patience, or commitment. You tell yourself you're just being understanding, you're giving them space. You're holding on because love isn't easy. But Buddhism asks a harder question. Does this connection bring clarity or confusion, peace or anxiety, expansion or contraction? If the relationship constantly leaves you tense, uncertain, and small, that is not love deepening, that is attachment tightening. The core of attachment is fear of loss. You are not attached because the person is special. You are attached because you are afraid of who you'll be without them, afraid of loneliness, afraid of starting over, afraid that this is the best you'll get. Buddhism sees this clearly and calls it ignorance, not as an insult, but as unawareness of impermanence and self-sufficiency. Everything is impermanent. People, feelings, roles, relationships. When you attach to something impermanent as if it is permanent, you suffer. This is not pessimism, it is realism. Buddhism does not tell you to avoid love. It teaches you not to cling to it as your identity. The moment you say, "I am nothing without them," attachment has replaced love. Attachment also distorts your behavior. You begin to tolerate things you normally wouldn't. Disrespect, inconsistency, emotional neglect. You excuse it because losing them feels worse than losing yourself. But Buddhism would say this is precisely where suffering multiplies. When you abandon your own boundaries to keep someone, you are practicing self-harm disguised as devotion. Love does not require self-erasure. Attachment does. Love says, "I choose you, but I remain whole without you." Attachment says, "I need you, even if it costs me my dignity." That difference matters. One leads to peace, the other leads to anxiety, jealousy, and fear. Buddhism teaches that any relationship rooted in fear will eventually collapse under its own weight. Another sign of attachment is obsession with outcomes. You constantly analyze where the relationship is going, what they meant, what will happen next. Your mind never rests. Buddhism sees this restless mind as suffering itself. Love lives in the present. Attachment lives in imagined futures and feared endings. That is why attachment exhausts you. You are mentally living 10 steps ahead, trying to secure something that cannot be secured. People often say, "But if I let go of attachment, won't I stop caring?" No, you stop clinging, not caring. Buddhism does not make you cold, it makes you clear. When attachment drops, love becomes cleaner, calmer, and less desperate. You stop trying to extract validation from the other person. You stop turning them into your emotional oxygen. Attachment also turns relationships into transactions. You give, but you keep score. You sacrifice, but you expect it to be repaid. You stay, but you silently hope it will make them stay too. Buddhism rejects this entirely. Anything given with expectation is not generosity. Anything done out of fear is not love. It is bargaining. When you release attachment, something unsettling but powerful happens. You realize how much of your suffering had nothing to do with the other person. It came from your own grasping, from your refusal to accept uncertainty, from your insistence that someone else complete you. This realization can sting, but it is also freeing. Because what you created through attachment, you can undo through awareness. Detachment in Buddhism is not indifference. It is emotional independence. It means you can love without losing yourself, care without clinging, be present without panicking about loss. When someone chooses you, you welcome them. When they don't, you don't collapse. You bow to reality and move forward intact. Attachment asks, "How do I keep them?" Love asks, "How do I stay true?" Buddhism teaches you to choose the second question every time. Because the moment you stop confusing attachment for love, you stop suffering for it. 3. You cannot be chosen while you are begging. There is a hard truth most people avoid because it shatters the story they tell themselves. You cannot be chosen while you are begging. The story they tell themselves. You cannot be chosen while you are begging. The moment you beg for attention, clarity, effort, or commitment, the balance is already broken. Buddhism would say that the moment craving turns into grasping, dignity is lost and suffering follows. Begging does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it's subtle. You reply instantly even when they don't. You accept vague answers instead of honest ones. You tolerate long silences and call it space. You keep showing up where you are barely acknowledged. On the surface, it looks calm. Inside, it is desperation trying to pass as patience. Buddhism sees this clearly. Any action rooted in fear is misaligned. When you beg to be chosen, you are communicating something powerful, even if you never say it out loud. You are saying, "My value is negotiable." You are saying, "I will stay even if I am not respected." People don't choose what devalues itself. They may use it, they may enjoy the convenience, but they will not honor it. This is not cruelty, it is human nature. The Buddha taught right intention and right action as pillars of a meaningful life. Begging violates both. Right intention comes from clarity and self-respect. Right action comes from alignment with truth. When someone repeatedly shows you they are unwilling or unable to choose you, continuing to chase them is not compassion, it is denial. Many people believe that if they just love harder, give more, stay longer, they will eventually be chosen. Buddhism dismantles this fantasy. Love does not convince, it invites. When you try to persuade someone to value you, you place yourself beneath them. And once you place yourself beneath someone, you train them to look down on you. Begging also traps you in performance. You start managing your words, your tone, your reactions. You hide your needs so you don't seem too much. You shrink your truth to remain tolerable. Buddhism would call this living in illusion. You are no longer being, you are performing to be accepted. And performance is exhausting because it is not sustainable. There is another painful truth here. People often sense when they are being begged, even unconsciously. They feel the pressure, the expectation, the imbalance. Instead of drawing them closer, it pushes them away. Not because you are unworthy, but because desperation repels. Buddhism teaches that clinging suffocates the very thing it tries to preserve. Choosing yourself is not an act of aggression, it is an act of alignment. The moment you stop begging, you reclaim your posture mentally and emotionally. You stop explaining yourself, you stop chasing clarity, you stop offering more to people who offer less. This is not punishment, it is self-respect returning to its rightful place. Many people fear that if they stop begging, they will lose the person completely. Buddhism would say this fear is misplaced. You have already lost them. What you are afraid of losing is the illusion that your effort might change the outcome. Letting go feels terrifying because it removes false hope. But false hope is one of the most dangerous forms of suffering because it keeps you stuck. When you stop begging, you create stillness. And in stillness, truth becomes obvious. Either the person steps forward willingly or they fade away. Both outcomes bring clarity. Buddhism values clarity over comfort. Comfort keeps you asleep. Clarity wakes you up. There is dignity in stepping back without bitterness, without speeches, without ultimatums. You simply stop offering yourself where you are not received. This is not playing games. It is ending self-neglect. The Buddha did not teach self-sacrifice at the cost of awareness. He taught the middle path where compassion includes yourself. Begging also keeps you trapped in waiting mode. Your life pauses while you wait for someone else to decide your worth. Buddhism rejects this entirely. Your life is happening now. Your breath is happening now. Peace is available now. Waiting for someone who does not choose you is postponing your own awakening. The paradox is this: the moment you stop begging, you become more grounded, more present, more whole. And whether anyone chooses you after that no longer defines you. You are no longer asking to be picked. You are standing in your own center. Buddhism does not promise that choosing yourself will make others choose you. It promises something more reliable. When you stop begging, you stop suffering. And that is a freedom no one else can give or take away. 4. Letting go is not loss, it is liberation. Most people think letting go means losing something important. Buddhism says the opposite. Letting go is not loss, it is the end of unnecessary suffering. What you lose when you let go is not love, not connection, not meaning. What you lose is illusion. And illusion is heavy. It drains you slowly, quietly, until you forget what peace feels like. People cling because they believe holding on will protect them from pain. In reality, clinging is what creates it. The Buddha described attachment like holding a burning coal, hoping it will warm you. You tell yourself it still matters. You tell yourself there is history. You tell yourself you've invested too much to walk away now. But the coal keeps burning your hand, and you keep calling it loyalty. Letting go becomes terrifying when your identity is entangled with the relationship. You're not just afraid of losing the person, you're afraid of losing the version of yourself that existed with them. The future you imagined, the meaning you attached to the connection. Buddhism understands this fear deeply. That's why it teaches non-attachment, not as cold detachment, but as freedom from false ownership. Here's the hard truth most people avoid. You are not letting go of the person. You are letting go of who you thought they were. You are letting go of expectations that were never met. You are letting go of imagined futures that existed only in your mind. Reality already ended the relationship long before you accepted it. Letting go is simply catching up to the truth. People often say, "But letting go hurts." Yes, it does. But Buddhism makes an important distinction between pain and suffering. Pain is unavoidable. Suffering is optional. Pain is the ache of acceptance. Suffering is the endless loop of resistance. Letting go hurts once. Holding on hurts every day. When you refuse to let go, you stay emotionally frozen in the past. You replay conversations. You analyze moments. You wonder what you could have done differently. Buddhism sees this as living in illusion, feeding the mind stories instead of observing reality. Letting go brings you back to the present, where your life is actually happening. Another reason people resist letting go is pride. Admitting it's over feels like admitting failure. But Buddhism doesn't frame life in terms of winning or losing. It frames life in terms of awareness. You didn't fail because someone didn't choose you. You suffer only if you refuse to see what is clearly in front of you. Letting go also strips away false hope, and false hope is seductive. It whispers, maybe tomorrow, maybe they'll change, maybe this is a test. Buddhism is blunt here. Hope without evidence is attachment wearing spiritual clothing. It keeps you emotionally invested in something that is not reciprocated. Liberation begins the moment you stop hoping for someone to become who they have shown you they are not. There is a strange emptiness that comes after letting go. Many people mistake this emptiness for loneliness or regret. Buddhism sees it differently. That emptiness is space. Space that was previously filled with anxiety, anticipation, and disappointment. At first, the silence feels uncomfortable because you are not used to peace. You are used to tension. In that space, something powerful happens. Your nervous system begins to settle. Your thoughts slow down. You stop scanning your phone. You stop waiting. You stop bracing yourself emotionally. This is not numbness. This is relief. Liberation does not arrive as excitement. It arrives as quiet. Letting go also restores your sense of agency. When you are attached, your emotional state depends on someone else's actions. When you let go, your inner balance returns to you. Buddhism teaches that freedom is not controlling outcomes. It is no longer being controlled by them. Many people fear that letting go will harden them, make them bitter, or close their heart. The opposite is true. Attachment hardens you. It fills you with resentment, jealousy, and self-doubt. Letting go softens you. It returns you to neutrality. You stop seeing the person as an enemy or a savior. They simply become someone who was part of your path and then wasn't. Another uncomfortable realization follows letting go. You see how long you stayed after peace left. This awareness can sting, but Buddhism welcomes this pain because it sharpens wisdom. You don't shame yourself. You learn, and learning prevents repetition. Liberation also means reclaiming time. Emotional attachment consumes enormous mental energy. When you let go, that energy returns to you. You begin to notice your breath again, your body, your days. You reconnect with parts of yourself that were neglected while you were chasing connection. Letting go does not mean you erase memories or deny feelings. Buddhism does not demand emotional suppression. It teaches non-identification. You allow the feelings to arise without letting them define you. Sadness passes, longing passes. What remains is awareness. The deepest freedom in letting go is this. You no longer need closure from someone else. Closure comes from understanding, from seeing clearly, from accepting impermanence. When you let go fully, you don't need explanations. Reality already gave you the answer. Buddhism does not romanticize holding on. It honors release, because only when your hands are empty can you walk forward unburdened. Letting go is not the end of love. It is the end of suffering masquerading as love. And that is not loss, that is liberation. 5. Loneliness is preferable to self-betrayal. Most people do not stay in unreciprocated relationships because they are loved. They stay because they are afraid. Afraid of silence, afraid of empty evenings, afraid of sitting alone with their own thoughts. Buddhism cuts straight through this fear and delivers a truth most people resist. Loneliness is painful, but self-betrayal is corrosive. One hurts temporarily, the other slowly destroys your sense of self. Loneliness is a feeling, self-betrayal is a habit, and habits shape who you become. When you remain where you are not chosen, you tell yourself small lies every day. You say it's not that bad. You say you're being patient. You say love requires endurance. But beneath these stories is a quieter truth. You are abandoning your own needs to avoid being alone. Buddhism sees this clearly. Avoidance of discomfort is one of the main engines of suffering. Loneliness does not mean something is wrong with you. It means you are human. It means you are between attachments. Buddhism teaches that all beings pass through periods of solitude, whether they want to or not. What matters is how you relate to that solitude. You can treat it as punishment, or you can treat it as purification. Self-betrayal, on the other hand, is always a choice. It happens when you ignore your intuition, when you silence your discomfort, when you stay quiet to keep the peace. Each time you do this, you fracture your inner trust. And once you stop trusting yourself, no relationship can save you. Many people believe being chosen by someone else will fill the emptiness they feel. Buddhism calls this a fundamental misunderstanding. Emptiness is not a flaw to be filled by others. It is a space to be understood. When you rush to fill it with people who don't choose you, you are not healing loneliness. You are postponing it while creating deeper wounds. There is also a hidden arrogance in avoiding loneliness. It assumes that being alone is worse than being disrespected. Buddhism rejects this assumption. Solitude offers clarity. Self-betrayal clouds perception. When you are alone, you see your thoughts clearly. When you betray yourself, your mind becomes noisy with justification, doubt, and self-blame. Loneliness has an end. Self-betrayal compounds. Each time you stay where you are not valued, it becomes easier to do it again. You lower the bar, you tolerate more, and eventually you forget what being treated well even feels like. Buddhism would say, this is how suffering becomes normalized. People often ask, but what if I let go and end up alone forever? Buddhism answers this without comfort or drama. You are already alone when you are with someone who does not see you. Emotional abandonment hurts more than physical solitude. One isolates your body, the other isolates your soul. Solitude also has a hidden gift. When you stop leaking energy into relationships that drain you, your awareness turns inward. You begin to notice how tense you were, how often you were anxious, how much effort it took to maintain something one-sided. This awareness can be uncomfortable at first, but it is honest. Buddhism values honesty over comfort because honesty leads to liberation. Self-betrayal keeps you small. You begin to measure yourself through someone else's behavior. Their silence becomes a verdict on your worth. Their inconsistency becomes something you internalize. Buddhism teaches that this is ignorance, forgetting your intrinsic value by outsourcing it to another person. Loneliness, by contrast, returns you to yourself. It strips away distractions. It forces you to sit with what is real instead of what is hoped for. This is why many people fear it. But Buddhism sees solitude as fertile ground. Monks intentionally seek it not to escape life, but to see it clearly. Another hard truth: when you stay out of fear of loneliness, you are teaching yourself that companionship is more important than integrity. Over time, this belief infects every relationship. You compromise faster, you settle sooner, you tolerate less effort, and you wonder why you feel empty even when you are not alone. Loneliness sharpens discernment. Self-betrayal dulls it. When you are alone, you can ask honest questions. What do I actually want? What drains me? What brings peace? When you are betraying yourself, you don't ask these questions because you already know the answers and you're afraid of them. Buddhism does not promise that choosing solitude will feel good immediately. It promises something more important: it will feel true, and truth has a stabilizing effect. Even when it hurts, it doesn't confuse you. Self-betrayal always confuses you because it forces you to live against your own awareness. There is also dignity in solitude, quiet dignity, the kind that comes from not chasing, not begging, not shrinking. Buddhism teaches that dignity is not something granted by others. It emerges naturally when your actions align with your values. Choosing to walk alone rather than stay where you are unseen is an act of profound self-respect. Eventually, loneliness passes. You adapt, you breathe, you rebuild, but self-betrayal leaves residue. It shows up as resentment, bitterness, and mistrust, not just toward others, but toward yourself. Healing that takes far longer than enduring a season of being alone. Buddhism asks you to choose the path that leads to clarity, not the one that numbs discomfort. Loneliness is honest pain. Self-betrayal is silent damage. If you must choose between the two, choose the one that leaves your integrity intact. Because being alone with yourself is survivable. Living against yourself is not. 6. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. This lesson is uncomfortable because it removes the last hiding place. It takes the focus off what others are doing to you and places it squarely on what you are allowing. Buddhism does not frame this as blame. It frames it as responsibility, and responsibility is power. The Buddha taught karma not as punishment, but as consequence. Not destiny, not fate, cause and effect. When you tolerate neglect, disrespect, inconsistency, or emotional unavailability, there is a consequence. The consequence is not that people become better. The consequence is that the pattern deepens. What you allow becomes the rule. What you excuse becomes the standard. Most people think tolerance is kindness. Buddhism disagrees. Tolerance without awareness is self-harm. When you repeatedly stay quiet about what hurts you, you are not being peaceful, you are being avoidant. When you accept behavior that erodes your dignity, you are not being compassionate. You are training others to ignore your boundaries. Boundaries are not walls, they are clarity. They communicate how you relate to yourself. And people take notes, whether consciously or not. If you accept being ignored, you are teaching others that your time is optional. If you accept emotional crumbs, you are teaching others that you don't require nourishment. If you stay after being disrespected, you are teaching others that respect is not necessary to keep you. This is not about making demands, it is about alignment. Buddhism emphasizes right action, acting in ways that reduce suffering rather than reinforce it. Staying where you are harmed reinforces suffering. Not just yours, but the other person's too, because it allows unconscious behavior to continue unchecked. Many people secretly hope that by tolerating more, they will be rewarded later, that their patience will be recognized, that their endurance will be appreciated. Buddhism calls this delusion. People don't change because you suffer quietly. They change when awareness interrupts behavior. Silence is not awareness. Silence is permission. Another difficult truth: people often treat you the way you treat yourself. If you ignore your own discomfort, others will too. If you dismiss your needs as too much, others will learn to do the same. Buddhism teaches that internal conditions shape external experience. When your inner stance is self-neglect, your outer relationships will mirror it. Tolerance also erodes your ability to trust yourself. Each time you feel something is wrong and override that feeling, you weaken your inner compass. Over time, you become disconnected from your intuition. You second-guess yourself. You ask others what you should feel instead of listening to what you already know. This is not humility. It is disorientation. The Buddha emphasized mindfulness for this reason. Mindfulness brings awareness to the moment discomfort arises, not after it explodes, not after resentment builds. At the exact moment your body tightens, your breath shortens, or your mind starts justifying something that feels off, that is the moment to pay attention. That is where suffering can be interrupted. Many people avoid setting boundaries because they fear conflict or abandonment. Buddhism does not promise that boundaries will keep everyone in your life. It promises something more important: they will keep you intact. Anyone who requires you to abandon yourself to stay is not offering connection, they are offering control. There is also a subtle form of arrogance hidden in over-tolerance. It assumes you can absorb harm indefinitely without consequence. Buddhism teaches impermanence even here. Your patience has limits. Your nervous system has limits. Your heart has limits. Ignoring these limits does not make you noble. It makes you exhausted. When you finally stop tolerating what harms you, people may react. Some will adjust, some will leave, some will accuse you of changing. Buddhism welcomes this outcome. It clarifies truth. Those who benefit from your lack of boundaries will always resist them. That resistance is information, not a reason to retreat. Teaching people how to treat you does not mean controlling them. It means controlling your participation. You do not argue with reality. You respond to it. If someone repeatedly crosses your boundaries, the teaching is not delivered through words. It is delivered through distance. Distance is not punishment. It is alignment. Buddhism does not chase people into understanding. It withdraws from what causes suffering. This withdrawal is not dramatic. It is quiet, calm, firm. You stop explaining. You stop justifying. You stop negotiating your worth. Another critical point: boundaries are not about perfection. People will make mistakes. Buddhism does not demand rigidity. It demands awareness. The difference is repetition. A mistake acknowledged is repairable. A pattern excused is destructive. Tolerance of patterns is where suffering compounds. When you raise your standards not as ultimatums, but as self-respect, you recalibrate your entire relational field. People who cannot meet you there will fade. People who can will emerge. This is not luck. It is alignment responding to clarity. Buddhism teaches that peace is not something you achieve. It is something you stop disrupting. Over-tolerance is one of the biggest disruptions. It keeps you in environments that agitate your mind and constrict your heart. When you stop tolerating what diminishes you, peace does not need to be chased. It arrives naturally. You do not teach people how to treat you with speeches or explanations. You teach them with consistency, with what you stay for, with what you walk away from, with what you no longer excuse. The moment you stop tolerating what hurts you, the lesson changes, not just for them, but for you. And that change is the beginning of real freedom. 7. When you choose yourself, peace chooses you. Most people think peace comes after everything works out, after someone finally chooses them. after the relationship stabilizes, after answers arrive. Buddhism dismantles this belief completely. Peace does not come as a reward for endurance. It arrives the moment you stop fighting reality. The moment you choose yourself, peace does not need to be chased, it moves toward you naturally. Choosing yourself is not a dramatic act. It does not require speeches, confrontations, or grand exits. It begins quietly, internally, with a decision. I will no longer abandon myself to be accepted by others. That single shift changes everything. Buddhism teaches that suffering persists not because life is unfair, but because we resist what is true. Choosing yourself is the end of resistance. Most of your exhaustion has not come from what happened to you. It has come from the internal war, wanting what is not choosing you, hoping for what is not coming, waiting for clarity that has already been shown through actions. When you choose yourself, that war ends. And when inner conflict ends, peace has space to appear. Peace is not excitement. It is not relief that comes from finally being validated. Peace is the absence of chasing, the absence of mental noise, the absence of rehearsed conversations and imagined futures. Buddhism describes peace as stillness, not emptiness, but stability, a mind no longer pulled in opposing directions. Choosing yourself also restores your internal authority. You stop outsourcing your worth to someone else's behavior. Their attention no longer dictates your mood. Their silence no longer feels like a verdict. Buddhism teaches that suffering intensifies when you place your inner balance in external hands. Choosing yourself takes that balance back. There is a misconception that choosing yourself makes you selfish, cold, or detached. Buddhism rejects this. Self-abandonment is not virtue. Self-respect is not ego. Choosing yourself simply means you stop violating your own awareness. You listen when your body tightens. You listen when your intuition warns you. You listen when peace leaves the room. That is not selfishness. That is wisdom. When you choose yourself, you stop chasing closure. You no longer need explanations, apologies, or last conversations. Buddhism teaches that closure comes from understanding, not from others changing. The understanding is simple. This does not bring peace, therefore it is not aligned. That understanding is enough. Peace also brings discernment. When you are no longer desperate for connection, you see people more clearly. You notice who meets you with presence and who meets you with confusion. You notice who gives freely and who requires you to shrink. Buddhism calls this right view, seeing things as they are, not as you wish them to be. Choosing yourself does not guarantee that people will suddenly choose you back. Buddhism does not make that promise. It offers something far more reliable. When you choose yourself, you become less vulnerable to rejection because your center is no longer dependent on being chosen. Acceptance becomes a bonus, not a necessity. There is also a deep physiological shift that happens when you choose yourself. Your nervous system relaxes, your breath deepens. You are no longer constantly on alert, scanning for signs, interpreting silence, preparing for disappointment. Buddhism understands that suffering lives not just in the mind, but in the body. Peace is felt physically before it is understood intellectually. Choosing yourself also ends the cycle of repetition. Many people attract the same patterns over and over because they never change their internal posture. They keep tolerating, chasing, explaining, hoping. Buddhism teaches that change begins at the level of action. When your actions shift, your karma shifts. When you stop participating in what harms you, the pattern has nowhere to continue. Peace also brings humility. You stop seeing yourself as a victim of others' choices and start seeing yourself as responsible for your own participation. This is not blame, it is empowerment. Buddhism teaches that freedom begins when you accept responsibility for where you stand. There is a quiet confidence that emerges when you choose yourself. Not arrogance, not superiority, just groundedness. You no longer need to prove your worth. You no longer need to be chosen to feel whole. This confidence is deeply attractive, not because it seeks attention, but because it is not seeking anything at all. Choosing yourself also makes room for healthier connection. When you are no longer desperate, you can meet others without fear. You can walk away without hatred. You can stay without losing yourself. Buddhism teaches the middle path, not clinging, not rejecting, but relating from clarity. Peace, in Buddhism, is not the absence of pain, it is the absence of inner conflict. Pain may still arise, memories may surface, sadness may pass through. But peace remains underneath because you are no longer betraying yourself. You are no longer living against what you know to be true. The final truth is this: you were never meant to be chosen by everyone. Buddhism does not teach universal acceptance. It teaches self-alignment. When you choose yourself, you align with truth. And peace always follows truth. You do not find peace by being chosen. You are chosen by peace the moment you stop abandoning yourself. And once that happens, nothing that leaves you can take it away. 8. You were never meant to be chosen by everyone only to be awake. This is where Buddhism delivers the final blow to one of the most deeply ingrained illusions humans carry: the need to be chosen, approved, validated, or confirmed by others. The Buddha never taught that awakening comes from belonging. He taught that awakening comes from seeing. And what you finally see when everything else falls away is this: seeking to be chosen was never the point. From childhood, you are trained to chase approval. Be liked, be accepted, be picked. Somewhere along the way, this conditioning turns into a quiet belief that being chosen means being worthy. Buddhism dismantles this belief at its root. Worth is not something granted by others. It is not something earned through endurance or sacrifice. It is intrinsic. And the moment you forget that, suffering begins. The need to be chosen is not love. It is identity seeking. It is the ego asking the world to confirm its existence. Buddhism calls this ignorance not as insult, but as misseeing. You are mistaking external recognition for internal truth, and no amount of being chosen will ever satisfy that hunger because it was never created by others in the first place. Here is the uncomfortable reality. Even if everyone chose you, peace would still not be guaranteed. Because the mind that needs to be chosen will always fear being unchosen. Buddhism understands this paradox clearly. Dependency on validation creates endless anxiety. You are only as safe as the next interaction, the next response, the next shift in someone else's feelings. Awakening begins when you stop asking, "Why didn't they choose me?" and start asking, "Why do I believe I need to be chosen to be whole?" That question changes the direction of your entire life. It moves you from reaction to awareness, from chasing to seeing. You were never meant to be chosen by everyone because not everyone is aligned with you. Impermanence ensures this. People are at different stages of awareness, different capacities for presence, different levels of emotional maturity. Buddhism does not ask you to force harmony where it cannot exist. It asks you to recognize alignment and bow out where it doesn't. Trying to be chosen by everyone requires you to fragment yourself. You adapt your tone, you soften your truth. You hide parts of yourself that might be inconvenient. Buddhism sees this fragmentation as suffering. Every time you split yourself to be accepted, you move further away from peace. Wholeness cannot coexist with performance. Awakening is the opposite of performance. It is radical honesty with yourself first. You stop pretending that rejection is about your worth. You stop internalizing others' limitations. You stop turning incompatibility into self-judgment. Buddhism teaches that not being chosen often has nothing to do with you and everything to do with where the other person is asleep. Here is another truth few people accept. Being unchosen can be a form of protection. When someone does not choose you, they are revealing their capacity, their readiness, their awareness. Buddhism sees this as information, not injury. Injury only happens when you interpret information through ego instead of wisdom. When you awaken, you stop taking everything personally, not because you become detached from life, but because you see more clearly. You understand that people act from their conditioning, fears, and attachments. You no longer demand that they be different, so you can be at peace. That demand was the source of suffering. Awakening also ends comparison. When you need to be chosen, you constantly measure yourself against others. Why them and not me? What do they have that I don't? Buddhism dissolves this comparison by exposing its false premise. You are not in competition for worth. There is no ranking system in truth. Comparison only exists in ego. As awakening deepens, something subtle but profound happens. You no longer define relationships by whether you are chosen. You define them by whether they are true to your values, true to your nervous system, true to your inner clarity. If a connection requires self-betrayal, it is not true no matter how intense it feels. Being awake also means accepting aloneness without turning it into a story. You stop narrating solitude as failure. You stop interpreting quiet seasons as punishment. Buddhism understands aloneness as a natural state, not something to escape, but something to understand. In aloneness, the noise of external validation fades, and awareness sharpens. When you are awake, you no longer chase belonging. You allow alignment. You don't force connection. You don't cling to people who cannot meet you. You don't resent those who walk away. You understand that paths diverge naturally, and you let them. This is the final liberation Buddhism offers. You stop needing the world to choose you because you are no longer asleep to yourself. You are rooted, grounded, oriented inward. And from that place, relationships become expressions, not lifelines. Some people will choose you, some won't. Awakening means neither outcome defines you. You were never meant to be chosen by everyone. You were meant to wake up. And once you do, the need to be chosen disappears because you finally see who you are without permission. 9. Freedom comes when you stop negotiating with reality. At some point, suffering stops being about loss and starts being about refusal. Refusal to accept what has already happened. Refusal to accept who someone has shown themselves to be. Refusal to accept that a door is closed. Buddhism is uncompromising here. As long as you keep negotiating with reality, you remain trapped by it. Negotiating with reality sounds like this. Maybe they'll change. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe if I wait a little longer. These thoughts feel harmless, even hopeful. But Buddhism sees them as subtle resistance. You are not responding to what is, you are arguing with it. And reality does not argue back. It simply keeps being what it is while you exhaust yourself trying to bend it. Freedom begins when you stop asking reality to explain itself to you. When someone doesn't choose you, reality has already spoken. When effort is one-sided, reality has already answered. When clarity never comes, that absence is the clarity. Buddhism teaches that truth is simple. The mind makes it complicated because simplicity threatens attachment. Most people don't suffer because they don't understand what's happening. They suffer because they understand it and refuse to accept it. Acceptance feels like defeat to the ego. But Buddhism is clear. Acceptance is not surrendering your power. It is reclaiming it from fantasy. Negotiation keeps you suspended between hope and disappointment. You are never fully in pain, never fully at peace, just waiting. Waiting is one of the most corrosive states for the mind. Buddhism teaches presence because presence ends waiting. You are either here or you are lost in imagined outcomes. There is no peace in between. Another form of negotiation is self-blame. If I were better, they would choose me. This is still resistance. It assumes reality made a mistake and needs correction. Buddhism rejects this entirely. You are not here to be chosen by everyone. You are here to see clearly. When you turn rejection into self-judgment, you personalize what was never personal. Freedom requires you to stop rewriting the past. You stop reframing disrespect as misunderstanding. You stop labeling absence as confusion. You stop calling neglect bad timing. Buddhism teaches that wisdom is seeing without distortion. The moment you remove the filters, truth becomes undeniable and oddly relieving. Relief comes because you stop carrying the burden of fixing something that was never yours to fix. You stop managing emotions that aren't yours. You stop holding space for people who will not hold space for you. Buddhism teaches non-ownership for this reason. You do not own others' capacity, readiness, or awareness. Negotiating with reality also keeps you from grieving properly. You cannot grieve what you refuse to admit is gone. Buddhism understands grief as a cleansing process. When you accept reality fully, grief moves through you. When you resist, grief stagnates and turns into bitterness. Freedom does not arrive as happiness, it arrives as alignment. The moment your inner understanding matches outer reality, tension dissolves. Buddhism calls this right understanding, nothing mystical, nothing dramatic, just the end of inner contradiction. Stopping negotiation also restores time. You are no longer mentally replaying scenarios or waiting for signs. Your attention returns to your life, your breath, your body, your present moment. Buddhism teaches that freedom is lived here, not in imagined futures. There is also humility in accepting reality. You stop assuming you know better than life. You stop demanding explanations. You bow not to people, but to truth. This bow is not submission. It is intelligence recognizing limits. When you stop negotiating with reality, you stop resisting endings. You allow things to conclude without dragging them forward artificially. Buddhism teaches that endings are not failures, they are transitions. What creates suffering is refusing to let transitions complete. Freedom also brings quiet courage. The courage to say, "This hurts, but it's real." The courage to stand in truth without cushioning it. Buddhism values this courage because it leads to liberation, not illusion. Once you stop negotiating, peace stabilizes. You no longer swing between hope and despair. You are grounded. Even pain feels cleaner because it is not prolonged by denial. This is one of Buddhism's sharpest teachings. Reality does not need your agreement to be true, but the moment you stop arguing with it, suffering loses its foundation. Freedom is not found by changing what happened. It is found by stopping the fight with what already is. And when that fight ends, your energy finally returns to you where it belongs. The deepest mistake was never loving too much. It was believing that love required self-abandonment. Buddhism never taught us to chase, cling, beg, or endure what erodes us. It taught us to see. And once you see clearly, you cannot unsee. If someone did not choose you, that was not your failure. But continuing to chase after that truth was the source of your suffering. Every lesson you've heard leads to the same quiet realization. Pain came from resisting reality, from mistaking attachment for love, from tolerating what diminished you, from fearing loneliness more than self-betrayal, from negotiating with endings, from chasing validation, and from forgetting your own center. Choosing yourself was never an act of rejection toward others. It was an act of honesty toward life. The moment you stop asking to be chosen, you return to alignment. And alignment is where peace lives. Buddhism does not promise that life will stop hurting. It promises that you can stop creating extra suffering. It offers freedom not by controlling outcomes, but by releasing illusions. When you let go of what does not choose you, you are not closing your heart, you are clearing it. You do not walk away in anger. You do not leave in bitterness. You leave with awareness. And that awareness changes everything. You stop chasing what drains you. You stop staying where peace cannot survive. You stop measuring your worth through other people's choices. In that stillness, something unmistakable appears. Dignity without effort, clarity without struggle, and peace without permission. The Buddha never asked you to be chosen by the world. He asked you to wake up to yourself. And the moment you do, nothing that leaves you can take your peace with it.